Do not sign that yet. Evan Brooks heard his own voice cut across the conference room and immediately wished he could drag the sentence back into his mouth. 12 people stopped moving. A legal advisor froze with one hand above a stack of documents. Somewhere near the windows, an air vent hummed with the calm confidence of something that had never accidentally challenged a billionaire chief executive officer in front of his entire leadership team. Damian Cross slowly looked up from the contract. Evan's pulse stumbled. This was wrong. Deeply wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Evan knew this meeting. He knew this room. He knew the polished walnut table, the silver pens, the gray Manhattan skyline beyond the glass, and the exact paragraph that came next. In the novel, Damian signed the agreement at 10:17 in the morning. 3 chapters later, hidden language inside the deal triggered a financial disaster that nearly destroyed the company's expansion plans. Evan had read the entire mess while eating cold pizza in Seattle. He had complained about it for 20 minutes to an apartment containing exactly one houseplant and no interested listeners. And now the contract was sitting 6 feet away from him. Damian's hand rested beside the signature page. Why, he asked. One word. Quiet. Controlled. Much worse than shouting. Evan tightened his grip on the presentation folder in his lap. Why what? Excellent. Brilliant. Pretending not to understand basic conversation would definitely save him. Damian's gray eyes did not move. Why should I not sign it? Every face in the room turned toward Evan. He had been in this world for less than 48 hours. His official job title was Junior Communications Associate. His current professional strategy had been stay invisible, answer emails, and under no circumstances interfere with the plot. Technically, he had now failed all 3 before lunch. Evan looked at the legal team. They looked confused. Of course they did. The problem was buried in an appendix nobody discovered until later. Evan knew exactly where. He also knew that explaining how he knew would require the phrase, because I read this chapter before I woke up. Inside your fictional universe, which felt difficult to include in a corporate setting. I think legal should review Section 14 again, Evan said carefully. The general counsel frowned. We reviewed the entire agreement. Of course. Evan smiled weakly. Very thoroughly, I am sure. Tremendous reviewing. Damian leaned back slightly. Section 14. Evan nodded. Specifically the renewal language. The general counsel opened the document. Paper shifted. Silence stretched. Evan could hear every small sound because Damian was still watching him. Not the contract. Him. That was becoming a problem. 2 minutes passed. Then the attorney's expression changed. There is an automatic exclusivity extension tied to the performance threshold. Damian's gaze finally moved. Which would prevent us from pursuing the West Coast partnership. Yes. The attorney looked unsettled. This should have been flagged. Evan tried to become furniture. Furniture had advantages. Nobody asked furniture how it predicted contract clauses. Damian closed the folder. Meeting adjourned. Chairs moved immediately. People gathered laptops and documents with the efficient speed of executives grateful not to be responsible for the awkward thing that had just happened. Evan stood with them. Escape. Beautiful, beautiful escape. Mr. Brooks. Evan stopped. Naturally. The universe had apparently canceled escape as a concept. He turned. Damian remained seated at the end of the table. Stay. The final executive left. The door clicked shut. Evan looked toward the windows. 37 floors below, Manhattan traffic moved like tiny threads of light. You are new, Damian said. Very. 2 days. Evan's stomach tightened. That sounds right. Damian stood and walked around the table, stopping several feet away. He was 31, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, and exactly as intimidating in person as the novel had promised, except the book had never mentioned how carefully he watched people when something interested him. Legal did not find that clause, Damian said. Apparently not. My acquisition team did not find it. Also concerning. You did. Evan swallowed. Lucky guess. Damian's expression did not change. You knew exactly where to look. Evan considered pretending to faint. Too theatrical. Probably ineffective. I read quickly. You did not have the contract until 9:40. Evan's mind went blank. Damian took one slow step closer to the table, still giving Evan plenty of space. You knew before legal did. Evan said nothing. Damian's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but curiosity. Somehow curiosity felt more dangerous. So tell me, Mr. Brooks, he said quietly. How did you know what was going to happen? 48 hours earlier, Evan Brooks had not existed in this world at all. Evan had opened his eyes 48 hours earlier to the sound of rain against unfamiliar windows and the immediate certainty that something was very wrong. His Seattle apartment did not have floor-to-ceiling glass. It definitely did not have a view of Manhattan. And unless his landlord had experienced a dramatic spiritual awakening overnight, it had never contained a marble kitchen island large enough to host a small conference. Evan sat up slowly on a couch he did not recognize. Okay. His voice sounded normal. That was something. He checked himself next. Same hands. Same face in the dark reflection of the television. Same 25-year-old man with brown hair refusing to cooperate before coffee. No mysterious transformation. Just an entirely different life arranged around him as if he had forgotten moving across the country. A phone rested on the coffee table. It unlocked with his face. Evan stared at the screen. Monday, March 18th, 8:12 in the morning. He opened the wallet application, then email, then calendar. Every answer made the situation worse. Evan Brooks, Junior Communications Associate. Crosswell Group, Manhattan. No, he searched the company. Crosswell Group appeared instantly. So did Damian Cross. 31 years old. Chief Executive Officer. Dark hair. Gray eyes. The same severe expression Evan had seen on the cover illustration of Midnight Contract, the romance novel he had fallen asleep reading in Seattle. Evan lowered the phone. No, he opened the ebook app. Midnight Contract was there. Same cover. Same chapter. List. Same story about Damian Cross and Rachel Moore, the brilliant consultant destined to challenge him, infuriate him, and eventually become the one person he trusted completely. Evan had finished the book twice. He knew the boardroom arguments, the gala scenes, the corporate betrayal, the rain-soaked confession, even the wildly unnecessary misunderstanding in Chapter 31. This was not merely similar. It was the book. Evan immediately searched his own name. Evan Brooks. No results. He searched again. Still nothing. That is rude. He tried Brooks. Nothing. Communications Associate. Nothing. Junior Employee. Nothing useful. He scrolled through chapter after chapter, increasingly offended by his own fictional absence. Apparently, he had not become a minor character. He had not become an extra. He had entered the world as someone the story had never bothered to invent. That realization should have terrified him. Instead, for approximately 15 seconds, it felt like excellent news. No role meant no plot obligations. No romantic destiny. No dramatic corporate scandal. No chance of accidentally replacing anyone important. Evan could work quietly, pay rent, stay away from Damian Cross, and figure out how to return to Seattle without touching a single major scene. He wrote 3 rules in the Notes app. Rule 1. Do not interfere with the story. Rule 2. Avoid major characters. Rule 3. Absolutely do not become interesting. At 9:30, he arrived at Crosswell Group and discovered that alternate universe Evan already had a desk, co-workers who recognized him, and 6 unread emails about a press briefing. A woman named Natalie from communications waved from the next cubicle. Morning. You survived orientation. Evan smiled cautiously. Apparently. You still helping me with the executive briefing tomorrow? His stomach tightened. Tomorrow. The contract meeting. He knew that meeting. Which briefing? Natalie frowned. Westlake acquisition. There it was. Evan remembered the subplot immediately. Damian signed the agreement. Legal missed a renewal clause. 3 chapters later, disaster. Evan looked at his monitor. Rule 1 suddenly felt less simple. Right, he said. Westlake. Natalie handed him a digital folder. You were just taking notes. Nothing exciting. Perfect. Invisible. Manageable. Evan spent the rest of the day practicing normal behavior while privately trying to understand how a person who did not exist in the novel could have co-workers, payroll records, and a dental plan. That night, he searched the book again. Still no Evan Brooks. Not one line. By the next morning, he had almost convinced himself that staying invisible was possible. Then he entered the conference room, saw the contract on the table, and remembered exactly what signing it would do. Rule 1 said do not interfere. Rule 3 said do not become interesting. Evan lasted 12 minutes. Then Damian reached for the pen, and every careful plan Evan had made collapsed into one sentence. Do not sign that yet. Now, 48 hours after waking in a world that had never written him, Evan stood alone with Damian Cross, and realized the most dangerous thing about being absent from the novel was that there was no page telling him what happened next. Damien did not ask the question again. Somehow that was worse. He simply stood beside the conference table, watching Evan with the calm attention of someone who had already decided the answer mattered. Evan adjusted the cuff of his shirt. Once. Twice. A nervous habit. Great. Wonderful. Apparently his body had chosen this exact moment to develop subtitles. I reviewed the materials, Evan said carefully. Quickly, Damien's gray eyes dropped briefly to Evan's hand, then returned to his face. You received them yesterday. I am an enthusiastic reader. You knew the exact section, lucky pattern recognition, and the exact consequence. Evan smiled. Less lucky. Silence stretched. Evan had read plenty of Damien Cross dialogue in the novel. Usually the man was direct, controlled, and terrifyingly efficient. What Evan had never read was this. Curiosity. Focus. The uncomfortable sense that Damien was trying to remember something. Finally, Damien asked, Have we met before? Evan's heart stopped doing useful work. No, Damien frowned slightly. I know. Evan blinked. That is an unusual response. Because I know we have not met. Damien walked toward the windows. Manhattan spread behind him in pale morning light. But you seem familiar. Evan stared. That was impossible. Not romance novel impossible. A different category. Evan did not exist in the original book. Damien could not remember someone the story had never created. Maybe I have one of those faces, Evan said. You do not. The answer came immediately. Evan looked offended despite himself. I'm not sure whether that was a compliment. It was an observation. You make those sound threatening. Damien almost smiled. Almost. Then he looked back toward the contract. You interrupted a meeting with 12 senior executives because you believed I was about to make a mistake. Evan swallowed. Yes. That is not behavior I would expect from someone trying to stay unnoticed. Evan went still. Damien noticed that too. Of course he did. I am not trying to stay unnoticed. You took the seat closest to the door. Evan looked toward the chair. Convenient exit. You have declined every optional executive briefing since joining the company. Evan stared. You checked. You work for me. Technically several layers below you. Damien ignored that. You avoid the executive elevators during peak hours. Evan's pulse shifted. Crowds. You took the stairs 21 floors yesterday. Fitness. Damien glanced at him. In dress shoes. Evan sighed. I am beginning to dislike how observant you are. Most people prefer it when I notice details. Most people are not trying to survive a very confusing week. The words escaped before Evan could stop them. Damien's expression softened by a fraction. Confusing how? Evan looked away. There was no safe version of the truth. Not yet. New city. New job. New circumstances. All technically accurate. Damien studied him, then nodded once. All right. Evan blinked. That is it. For now. Relief arrived too quickly. Evan reached for his folder. Excellent. Very productive interrogation. Conversation. That word feels generous. Damien let him reach the door before speaking again. Mr. Brooks. Evan turned. Damien remained near the window, one hand in his pocket. If you see another problem before the rest of us do, tell me. Evan stared. You believe me? I believe the contract would have been signed if you had stayed quiet. That was not exactly trust, but it was dangerously close to usefulness. Understood. Evan opened the door. And Evan. He froze. First name. That felt unnecessarily personal. Damien's expression had changed again, quieter now. If we really have never met, why do I feel like I have been waiting for you to show up? Evan forgot every sarcastic response he had ever practiced. Damien seemed almost as unsettled by the question as Evan was. Neither man spoke. Then Evan left, walking down the executive hallway with his folder pressed against his side and one impossible thought repeating in his head. He knew Damien Cross had never met him. The novel confirmed it. The world confirmed it. Logic confirmed it. So why did Damien look at him like some part of him remembered otherwise? By lunchtime, Evan had created a new rule. Do not accidentally become Damien Cross's favorite employee. Unfortunately, Damien seemed determined to make that rule impossible. The first sign came at 11:10, when Natalie leaned over the divider between their desks and whispered, "Why is the chief executive officer asking for you?" Evan looked up from his screen. That sounds like a question for human resources. No, seriously. She pointed toward Evan's inbox. A message from Damien's executive assistant sat at the top. Mr. Cross would like Mr. Brooks present for the investor presentation at 1. Evan stared at it. The investor presentation. He knew that scene. In the novel, the presentation failed when a senior vice president accidentally used outdated projections. Damien caught the error too late. The board spent 2 chapters blaming each other. Evan closed his eyes. Absolutely not. Natalie blinked. What? Nothing. He opened the presentation file. Same slides. Same numbers. Same mistake waiting on slide 26. Evan could ignore it. He should ignore it. The story survived the problem originally. Nobody lost their job. The company recovered. Rule 1 remained technically available. At 12:55, Evan entered the conference room and sat in the farthest chair from Damien. Damien noticed immediately. You prefer exits. Evan looked at the door behind him. I appreciate architectural flexibility. Damien almost smiled. The presentation began. Evan watched slide numbers advance. 22, 23, 24. His fingers tightened around his pen. 25. Then 26 appeared. Wrong projection. Same as the novel. Evan lifted his hand. That number is outdated. The presenter stopped. Every head turned. Again. Evan seriously considered wearing a paper bag over his face to future meetings. Damien looked at the screen. Explain. Evan pointed toward the revenue column. That forecast includes the discontinued regional contract. The revised model should be 8.4% lower. The finance director checked his tablet. His expression changed. He is right. Damien said nothing. Evan wished he would stop doing that. Silence from Damien always felt like being placed under a microscope. The slide was corrected. The meeting continued. Nobody panicked. Nobody argued. No 2-chapter corporate crisis. Evan had changed another scene. Afterward, he escaped into the hallway before Damien could stop him. He made it 6 steps. Evan. Of course. He turned. Damien approached at an unhurried pace, holding the revised deck. You knew again. Evan adjusted his cuff. I read the numbers. Damien's eyes dropped to his hand. You do that when you are nervous. Evan stopped moving. Do what? Your cuff. Evan looked down. I do not. You have done it 5 times today. Evan stared at him. That is an unsettling amount of attention. You keep giving me reasons. I would like to stop. Damien's mouth curved slightly. I do not think you mean that. Evan's heartbeat shifted. Dangerous sentence. Very dangerous. He looked toward the elevator. I should get back downstairs. Lunch first. Evan blinked. What? You missed it. How do you know? Natalie told my assistant you had been working since 9. Evan stared. There are too many people involved in my nutritional schedule. Damien gestured toward the executive dining room. Come eat. Is that an order? Damien paused. No, that answer caught Evan off guard. Then I can say no. Yes. Evan should have. Instead, 10 minutes later, he was sitting across from Damien with a turkey sandwich and the growing suspicion that his survival instincts had become decorative. Damien did not question him about predictions. He asked about Seattle. Evan nearly dropped his drink. How do you know I am from Seattle? Your employee record. You read my employee record? After you prevented 2 expensive mistakes in 24 hours. Fair. Annoying, but fair. Evan answered carefully. Coffee. Rain. Ferries. Restaurants he missed. Damien listened with an attention that felt oddly personal. Then Evan mentioned hating crowded elevators. Damien glanced toward him. That explains the stairs. Evan froze. You remembered. Yes. One small word. Somehow it landed harder than it should have. Evan looked down at his plate. This was not in the novel. None of it was. Damien was supposed to be preparing for the gala subplot by now, not learning Evan's lunch preferences. You are doing it again, Damien said. Evan looked up. Doing what? Looking like I just stepped off a path only you can see. Evan said nothing. Damien leaned back, calm but thoughtful. You keep saving me from problems before they happen. Coincidence. Twice. Very committed coincidence. Damien gave a quiet laugh. Evan forgot his response. In the original novel, Damien Cross did not laugh easily. Rachel Moore earned the first real one in Chapter 12. Evan knew because he remembered the scene. Yet here Damien was, smiling across a lunch table that had never existed. Evan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A calendar alert appeared on the screen. Crosswell Foundation Gala. Friday, 7 o'clock. Evan's stomach tightened. He knew that gala. He knew exactly what was supposed to happen there. And for the first time, he was no longer sure whether Damien would follow the script. Friday arrived much too quickly. Evan spent the entire afternoon pretending the Crosswell Foundation Gala was just another company event and not the setting of one of the most important scenes in the novel. By 6:45, he stood near the ballroom entrance of a Manhattan hotel, adjusting his cuff for the third time and immediately stopping when he remembered Damien had noticed that habit. "Excellent," he muttered. "Now I am nervous about looking nervous." The ballroom beyond him glittered with chandeliers, white tablecloths, polished glass, and enough expensive clothing to fund Evan's Seattle rent for several lifetimes. He knew this room. He knew tonight. At 7:12, Rachel Moore would arrive. At 7:20, Damien would meet her beside the charity display near the west windows. Rachel would challenge a comment Damien made about the Foundation's outreach strategy. He would be annoyed, then interested, then, according to the novel, unable to stop thinking about her. Finally, something Evan could leave alone. No warning about contracts. No incorrect projections. No reason to interfere. All he had to do was stay far away and let the story remember what it was doing. "You look like you are planning an escape." Evan closed his eyes briefly. Damien stood beside him in a black suit, calm, composed, and entirely too observant. "I am appreciating the exits. You always do. Fire safety is important." Damien glanced at Evan's cuff. "You are nervous." Evan dropped his hand. "I am dressed formally. That creates emotional instability." Damien almost smiled. "Walk with me." "Where?" "Across the room." "That sounds suspiciously simple." "It is." Evan followed because apparently saying no to Damien had become an advanced skill he had not yet unlocked. They crossed the ballroom while guests greeted Damien every few feet. Evan kept checking the west windows. 7:10. Almost time. Then he saw her. Rachel Moore. Dark blonde hair, blue dress, confident posture, exactly as described. She entered carrying a folder from the Foundation Committee. Evan nearly sighed with relief. There. Original heroine. Original scene. Narrative order restored. Damien noticed his expression. "What? Nothing. You look relieved." "I enjoy punctuality." Damien followed Evan's gaze toward Rachel. For one wonderful second, everything aligned. Rachel approached. "Mr. Cross." Damien turned. "Ms. Moore." Evan knew. The next line. Rachel would question why Crosswell funded publicity campaigns instead of expanding neighborhood programs directly. Damien would challenge her assumptions. Spark. Conflict. Romance. Rachel opened the folder. "I reviewed the outreach proposal, and I think your media budget is backward." "Perfect." Damien raised an eyebrow. "Backward." There it was. Evan stepped away slowly. His work here was done. Rachel continued. "You are spending more telling people about the program than actually bringing people into it." Damien studied her. Evan waited for the exact reply from Chapter 8. Instead, Damien glanced across Rachel's shoulder. At Evan. Their eyes met. Evan froze. Damien looked back at Rachel. "Send your recommendations to my office Monday." Rachel blinked. "That is it. If the numbers support your argument, we will change the budget." Then Damien stepped around her and walked directly toward Evan. No, absolutely not." Evan looked behind himself, just in case Damien had discovered another person standing there. "Nobody." Damien stopped beside him. "You were leaving. I was giving you space." "Why?" Evan glanced toward Rachel, who was now speaking with another Foundation director and looked completely unbothered. "You were having an important conversation. I finished it. Very efficiently." Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. "You expected something else." Evan laughed too quickly. "Why would I?" "Because you have been watching the clock since you arrived." Evan's stomach dropped. Damien continued quietly. "You knew she would come over. She is on the committee. You knew where she would stand." Evan said nothing. Around them, the gala continued, music soft beneath hundreds of conversations. Damien stepped no closer, but his attention settled fully on Evan. "There it is again," he said. "What?" "That look." Evan swallowed. "What look?" Damien's voice softened. "Like I just made a choice you did not expect." Evan looked toward Rachel, then back at Damien. The original scene had begun perfectly. Every line had been waiting. Every piece had been in place. Damien had simply walked away from it, and he had walked toward Evan. By the time Evan got home from the gala, he had upgraded his situation from confusing to structurally impossible. He kicked off his shoes near the apartment door, loosened his tie, and went straight for the phone. The novel opened where he had left it, Chapter 8 glowing against the dark room. Evan scrolled to the gala scene. Rachel entered. Rachel challenged Damien. Damien answered. Then the text stopped. Evan frowned and refreshed the page. A sentence appeared. Damien looked across the ballroom. Evan's breath caught. The next line flickered. Rachel Moore became Evan Brooks. Then Evan Brooks disappeared. The sentence rewrote itself. Damien looked toward the unknown variable. Evan sat down very slowly. No, he refreshed again. The words changed. The story cannot predict someone who was never written. Evan stared at the screen until it dimmed. He tapped it awake. Same sentence. He searched his name. Still no original results. Then he searched for the phrase, unknown variable. One result. The gala. That was all. Every scene that had existed before Evan arrived remained clean and complete. Every scene he had changed now contained gaps, rewritten lines, or passages that seemed unable to decide what had happened. The contract meeting ended with 3 contradictory versions. The investor presentation had an entire paragraph where the text appeared, vanished, and returned with different wording. The lunch with Damien did not exist at all. Evan stood and began pacing. This was good. Maybe. Possibly. If the book could not write him, then the book could not control him. Unfortunately, that also meant every time Evan stepped into a scene, he was turning the future into blank space. His phone buzzed. Damien. Evan looked at the name for 3 full seconds before answering. Hello. You left without saying goodbye. Evan closed his eyes. I assumed you would survive. That is reassuring. Damien sounded amused. Evan glanced back at the novel. Unknown variable. Why did you walk away from Rachel? Silence. That is a strange question. Please humor me. Because our conversation was finished. You could have continued it. I did not want to. Evan stopped pacing. Why? Damien took a moment before answering. Because I wanted to talk to you. Simple. No hesitation. Evan sat on the edge of the couch. You barely know me. I know enough to be interested. That word landed badly. Interested. Curiosity. Mystery. A puzzle. Of course. Damien was not choosing Evan. He was studying the anomaly. Evan looked down at the novel. What if the reason you are interested is because something about me does not make sense? Something about you definitely does not make sense. That was not comforting. Damien gave a quiet laugh. It was not supposed to be. Evan pressed his thumb against the edge of the phone. You should focus on Rachel. The silence that followed felt different. Cooler. Why? She is smart. She challenged you. You clearly respect that. All true. So spend time with her. Why are you recommending people to me like restaurants? Evan almost laughed despite himself. I am trying to help. With what? There was no answer Evan could safely give. Damien continued, slower now. You keep acting like there is a correct version of my life, and I am failing to follow it. Evan's chest tightened. Too close. That is not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Evan looked at the impossible sentence on the screen. The story cannot predict someone who was never written. I mean, maybe some choices are supposed to happen. Supposed to according to whom? Evan said nothing. Damien's voice softened. Evan. Yes. Did you know I would meet Rachel tonight? Evan stared toward the window. Manhattan lights blurred against the glass. I had a feeling. Did you know what she would say? Evan remained silent. And did you expect me to react differently? Still silence. Damien exhaled quietly. You are terrible at lying. I am discovering that. Good. Evan frowned. Good. Because I would rather you confuse me honestly. The absurdity of that almost made Evan smile. Almost. That sentence does not make sense. Neither do you. Evan looked down at the novel again. Another line appeared beneath the first. He watched the letters form one by one. The story cannot predict someone who was never written. And for the first time, neither could Damien. Cross. Evan's fingers went still. Damien spoke through the phone. Are you there? Yes. What happened? Evan swallowed. Nothing. But that was not true. Something enormous had happened. The book had just admitted it did not know what came next. And somehow, instead of feeling free, Evan had never been more afraid of making the next choice. For the next 3 days, Evan attempted a strategy that was both emotionally mature and completely ineffective. He avoided Damien. Not dramatically. He simply took different elevators, ate lunch 20 minutes later than usual, answered messages with professional efficiency, and volunteered for tasks that kept him several floors away from the executive offices. It worked until Tuesday at 4:17, when Evan stepped out of a conference room, carrying campaign reports, and found Damien waiting beside the windows. Evan stopped. That feels intentional. It is. I was afraid of that. Damien held out a paper coffee cup. Vanilla latte. Evan stared at it. Why do you have that? Because it is what you order. That does not answer the question. You skipped lunch. Evan looked at the cup, then at Damien. You really need less information about my schedule. You keep disappearing from it. There was no irritation in Damien's voice. That almost made it worse. Evan accepted the coffee because refusing a perfectly good vanilla latte on principle felt wasteful. Thank you. Damien nodded toward an empty meeting room. 5 minutes. Is that a request? Yes. Evan sighed. Your respect for consent is making avoidance difficult. A faint smile appeared on Damien's face. They stepped inside. Damien remained near the door instead of moving closer, leaving several feet between them. You have been avoiding me. Evan studied the coffee lid. I have been working on 3 separate floors. Versatility. And eating lunch at 1:40 instead of 1:20. Evan looked up. That is alarmingly specific. You are proving my point. Evan exhaled. There was no elegant way through this. I think you are interested in me because I am strange. Damien's expression shifted. You are strange. Thank you. That was not the entire sentence. Evan waited. Damien folded his arms loosely. The strange part got my attention. There it was. Evan felt the uncomfortable relief of being proven right. Exactly. You interrupted a contract signing with information you should not have had. Then you corrected projections before finance did. Then you watched a woman cross a ballroom like you had already seen the scene happen. Damien paused. Of course I noticed. Evan tightened his fingers around the cup. So this is curiosity. It started that way. Evan looked up. Damien continued before he could respond. Then I noticed other things. Evan went still. What things? You hate crowded elevators. That is not significant. You always take the corner seat in meetings because you dislike being surrounded. Evan said nothing. You leave frosting on anything sweeter than vanilla. Evan blinked. How do you know that? Foundation breakfast. Evan remembered the untouched icing on his plate. Damien continued, calm and precise. You straighten your cuff when you are nervous. You make jokes when you want people to stop asking whether you are all right. You always thank assistants before executives. You send corrected documents privately because you do not like embarrassing people in meetings. Evan's throat tightened. None of those things were mysteries. None were predictions. None belonged to the book. Damien looked directly at him. You think I am interested because I cannot explain you. Evan struggled to answer. Aren't you? The mystery got my attention. Damien's voice softened. You kept it. Evan forgot the coffee in his hands. The room seemed suddenly quieter. You barely know me. Then let me. Simple words. No demand. No destiny. Evan looked away. What if knowing me creates problems? It already has. Evan gave him a startled look. Damien smiled. I have attended more communications meetings this week than in the previous 6 months. Evan laughed before he could stop himself. Damien's expression warmed. That was another problem. A small one. A dangerous one. A very human one. Evan stared down at the latte. You should not make choices because of me. Damien's smile disappeared, but his voice remained gentle. You keep saying that. Because you do not understand. Then explain it. Evan could not. Not yet. Damien waited, then nodded once. All right. But stop deciding what my reasons are before asking me. Evan looked at him. Damien moved toward the door, then paused. And for the record, I am not trying to solve you. What are you trying to do? Damien glanced back. Get to know you. Then he left. Evan remained alone with the coffee warming his hands, and one realization he had spent days trying not to reach. Damien was not looking at him like a puzzle anymore. He was looking at him like a person, and somehow that was much harder to run from. The message appeared in the novel at 2:14 the next morning. Evan knew the exact time because he had been awake for 43 minutes, sitting on the edge of his couch with the city glowing beyond the windows and Damien's words still repeating in his head. Then let me. Evan had opened the book looking for answers. Instead, the book finally gave him one. A new page had appeared after the corrupted gala chapter. At first, there was only a single sentence. The original story can still be restored. Evan stared at it. His pulse quickened. Another line formed beneath it. The unknown variable must be removed. Evan stopped breathing for a second. Removed how? As if the book had heard him, more words appeared. Return to the place from which you came, and the story will correct itself. Every alteration caused by your presence will disappear. Evan read it twice. Then a third line appeared. No character in this world will remember Evan Brooks. The apartment became very quiet. Seattle. His real apartment. His old job. His familiar grocery store. Rain against the kitchen window. A life where nobody questioned how he knew tomorrow. He had wanted that from the moment he woke here. He should have felt relieved. Instead, his first thought was Damien. That is inconvenient, Evan whispered. His voice sounded thin. The book offered one final sentence. The choice may be made at any time before the story reaches its unwritten ending. Evan closed the application. Then he reopened it, hoping the words would be gone. They were not. By 7:30, Evan had decided on a plan. A terrible plan, but at least it had structure. Finish his projects. Leave useful notes. Stop accepting coffee from Damien. Stop letting this world feel permanent. By Wednesday, Natalie noticed. Are you quitting? Evan nearly dropped a folder. Why would you ask that? Because you organized the shared drive. Maybe I have grown as a person. You labeled everything. Evan looked at the screen. Personal growth can be aggressive. He managed to avoid Damien until Thursday evening, when the elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor and Damien stepped inside. Evan considered getting out. Too obvious. Damien pressed the lobby button. You are doing it again. Evan stared forward. Using an elevator? Leaving before anything can happen. Evan's fingers moved toward his cuff. He stopped them. Damien noticed anyway. What changed? Nothing. You are worse at lying when you are tired. Evan laughed quietly. That feels unfair. The elevator descended. 28. 27. Damien did not crowd him. Did not demand. He simply waited. Evan finally said, What if I told you there was a way for me to leave? Damien's expression sharpened. Leave the company? No, Evan swallowed. Leave all of this. The elevator continued downward. And go where? Home. Damien studied his face. Seattle. Evan nodded. Something like that. Why does that sound like you were saying goodbye? Evan looked at the floor numbers. 21. 20. 19. Because if I go, you will not remember me. Damien went completely still. Evan forced himself to continue. Nobody will. Everything goes back to the way it was supposed to be. Supposed to be. Damien repeated the phrase quietly. There it is again. Evan closed his eyes. I know. And you believe this? I have reasons. Damien looked toward the elevator doors, then back at Evan. Can you tell me those reasons? Not all of them. Can you tell me whether leaving is what you want? Evan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Damien gave a small nod, as if the silence answered enough. If I forget you, he said, does that make leaving easier? Evan looked at him. Damien's voice remained calm, but something in his expression had gone painfully open. Because I think it would make staying harder for me, even if I could not remember why. Evan's throat tightened. That does not make sense. Neither has most of this. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. People crossed the marble floor beyond them. Damien did not move immediately. I am not going to ask you to stay because of me. Evan looked at him. You are not. No, Damien stepped out, then turned back. But if you leave, do not pretend it is because some invisible rule made the decision for you. Evan remained inside the elevator. Damien held his gaze. Make sure the choice is actually yours. The doors began to close between them. Evan stood alone as the elevator started downward toward the parking level, his reflection pale in the mirrored wall. For days he had been afraid the novel was controlling Damien. Now the book had done something worse. It had handed control back to Evan. Evan did not make the decision that night. That surprised him. He had spent his first days in Manhattan desperate to get back to Seattle, convinced that home was a fixed point and everything around him was temporary. Yet when the novel finally offered him a door, he discovered that knowing where an exit was did not make walking through it simple. Friday morning arrived with rain sliding down the apartment windows. Evan sat at the kitchen island with coffee growing cold beside him and the novel open on his phone. The page still waited. Return to the place from which you came, and the story will correct itself. He stared at the sentence until the words stopped feeling like instructions and started feeling like a dare. Fine, he whispered. What happens if I stay? Nothing. Evan frowned. Very mature. He refreshed the page. Still nothing. He closed the book, reopened it, and asked again. What happens if I stay? The screen turned white. Not blank because it had failed to load. Blank because there was nothing written there. Evan's pulse slowed. For the first time since waking in this world, the novel had no answer. No warning. No prediction. No ending. Just empty space. Evan sat back. He had spent days treating uncertainty like danger. The book could not predict him. Damien could not remember him from any logical past. Rachel had stepped easily into a life that did not require Damien's romance. The company had changed because Evan spoke when he could have stayed silent. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had demanded correction except the book itself. Maybe a story calling something original did not make it right. Maybe Seattle was home because he had lived there. Maybe Manhattan was becoming home because he was living here now. Those truths did not cancel each other. Evan looked at the blank screen and laughed softly. So now you decide to respect boundaries. His phone buzzed. Damien. Evan stared at the name, then answered. Hello. Are you still here? Damien asked. No greeting. No careful small talk. Evan smiled despite himself. That depends on how philosophical you want to get before 9 in the morning. There was a pause. I mean Manhattan. I know. Evan looked toward the rain. Yes. I am still here. Damien exhaled, almost too quietly to hear. All right. Evan waited. That is all. You told me the choice had to be yours. You really committed to that. I meant it. Evan looked at the blank page. What if I make the wrong choice? Damien answered without hesitation. Then you make another one tomorrow. Evan went still. So simple. Almost annoyingly simple. No destiny. No perfect ending. Just tomorrow. Where are you? Evan asked. Office. Already. Some of us have executive responsibilities. Some of us are junior communications associates who recently prevented your company from signing a terrible contract. Damien laughed. Evan smiled wider. Are you free for dinner? Silence. Evan immediately regretted every decision that had led to language. You can say no, he added quickly. I know. Good. I am surprised. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. That makes 2 of us. Damien's voice softened. Tonight. Evan looked once more at the novel. Blank pages. No instructions. No guarantee that this world would keep him forever. No guarantee that Damien would always choose him. No guarantee Evan would never miss Seattle so much it hurt. For once, none of that felt like a problem he needed solved before taking one step forward. Let us start with tonight, Evan said. Several hours later, he stood outside a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, hands in his coat pockets while yellow lights spilled onto the wet sidewalk. Damien approached from the corner, umbrella folded at his side, looking less like the untouchable chief executive officer from the novel and more like a man who had hurried slightly because he did not want to be late. He stopped in front of Evan. You stayed. Evan looked at him. Today. Damien nodded. Today is enough. No dramatic music. No perfect confession. No predetermined scene waiting to force them into position. Damien simply held the restaurant door open. Evan stepped inside, then paused and looked back at him. For the record, I still think you were written as unnecessarily intimidating. Damien raised an eyebrow. Written. Evan froze. Damien smiled. We can discuss that over dinner. Evan laughed, and this time he did not check the book to see whether the moment belonged there. Behind them, Manhattan continued without instructions. Somewhere in his apartment, the final pages remained empty. Evan had once thought blank space meant there was nothing ahead. Now he understood. It meant there was finally room to choose what came next.